Welcome back, 6:48 on this Friday morning. Listen to this. 1 out of every 12 men will go through depression sometime in their lifetime. And for many, it's something they try to hide. But this guy right here, Mark Meier, is shouting it out to the world. He's drawing attention to the issue by riding this bike right here, almost 4,000 miles all across the country. He's raising a lot of awareness about the issue. Mark, what gave you the idea to jump on your bike?
Well, we wanted to do something big to get people's attention.
This is big.
And we thought if we went from San Francisco to New York City, we'd have opportunities all across the United States to raise awareness and talk about this issue of depression in men.
Are you finding that this is a way of opening up that discussion?
Without question. We have an RV that's emblazoned with information about men and depression. And when we stop places like rest stops, restaurants, coffee shops, I'm getting guys to talk to me, and I've talked to a lot of Vietnam and a lot of veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan.
What is it about men, and maybe this is a tough question that nobody can answer, what is it about guys that make them not want to go seek help for something like this?
Well, first of all, it's still difficult to admit you have it. I lived with it for a number of years and almost lost my life to it, and it took me many, many years to admit I have it. A lot of guys still face a lot of stigma, embarrassment, shame. They don't think they get depressed. And it's often under-recognized. Men frequently don't endorse the feeling sad part of depression. Men are more angry, more irritable, and so it often gets missed by physicians.
Is that the ultimate risk there, that men's depression often ends with somebody taking their own life?
It's our greatest fear. You know, there's roughly 34,000 suicides in this country every year, and 27,000 of those are men. Men like me, husbands, fathers, men with good jobs, men who people just don't see it coming.
So you have jumped onto your bike to raise awareness here. You are how far into this almost 4,000-mile trek?
Well, we just rolled over about 2,000 miles, about 30 miles outside of Cedar Rapids, so hopefully we're halfway.
How are you holding up?
Good. You know, it's been a lot of fun. No injuries, no real problems. Your weather's going to get real hot, it looks like. So, yeah, right. So, in general, no, it's been going really well. We've been having a lot of fun.
Okay, so you're going to continue the ride tomorrow when folks can join you. You're going to start off Green Square Park tomorrow morning, downtown Cedar Rapids, and ride to Palo. Then after that, noon tomorrow, a seminar at Mercy Medical Center where men can learn more about this. We'll post a link on kgan.com to your foundation, the Face It Foundation, and also the link to Mercy Medical Center so you can learn more about that seminar that's coming up tomorrow at noon. There is so much information out there. It's just a matter of getting men to admit they have the problem and to go in search of that help, I guess.
Without question. And good places to go are your primary care physician, and certainly the great folks at Mercy Medical Center have wonderful behavioral health services available.
Thanks so much, Mark. We appreciate you being here on this early Friday morning. Good luck with the ride.
Oh, thank you very much.
I want to thank the Hawkeye Bike Association. Dan Tucker, where's Dan? Dan he organized an awesome ride for us, and the whole bike association really took good care of us out on some of the winding country roads to make sure that we stayed safe and had a great ride. So we went all the way from Green Square Park to Palo and back to Mercy. So a great workout. Today we're going to be learning about signs of depression, ways to cope with depression, and most importantly, the resources that are available in our community. We're very blessed at Mercy here that we have a wide array of services that we'll tell you about in a little while. And you've probably noticed also on the back table, the Out of Darkness organization has a table set up to promote the Out of Darkness Walk that will be taking place on September 17th. So Mercy is going to be donating $1 for every attendee today to the Out of Darkness Foundation, or organization. So thank you all for that. Now I have the honor of introducing Sister Susan O'Connor, who is the Vice President of Mission Integration here at Mercy Medical Center. So, Susan.
Thank you, Ann, and good morning, everyone. I would really like to second the warm welcome that Ann has already given you this morning. We are very happy that all of you are here. This is such a wonderful opportunity for us to gather on this hot July day in this sacred place that nearly 111 years ago was begun to care for the sick and enhance the health of the communities we serve. guided by the spirit of our founders, the Cedar Rapids Sisters of Mercy. Mercy Medical Center is truly honored to have you here today, and our prayer is that our brief time together will be a source of information and inspiration for all of us. As we are all very aware, depression is an illness that strikes many in our community and probably touches all of us in some way. Mercy is very pleased to join Mark Meier and the Face It Foundation in their extraordinary efforts to raise awareness and encourage conversations about depression. As we continue our efforts to serve and meet the needs of our community with both inpatient and outpatient programs, we also acknowledge that fighting depression and the stigma of depression must be a collaborative community effort. Mercy is dedicated to bringing help and hope to all those battling depression, to remind them that they are not alone. Often individuals with depression, along with their families, friends, and loved ones, feel isolated in their battle. We here at Mercy work to assist organizations such as Out of Darkness, that Ann has already mentioned, and other local groups to reach out and to support all these individuals. Working closely together as a community, we all make a real difference and offer a little light to people suffering in the dark. Thank you for being here today. Your presence helps us increase awareness and does provide hope to our community. So again, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sister Susan. We certainly, none of us would be here today without the Sisters of Mercy, who, in their legacy, a dedication to helping those in need in our community, and that's close to all of our hearts. At those of us that work with Mercy Medical Center. Millions of people suffer from depression every year, and it isn't just the individual that suffers, but the family members as well. 1 out of 12 men, they estimate, also suffer from depression, and men tend to be a little less willing to seek treatment than women for a variety of reasons. But facing depression is important. It's life-changing, and it can be life-saving. And so I want to introduce the Face It Foundation team. Riding today was Mark Meier and his daughter Anna. Where is Anna? Anna is also riding across America with Mark. She's 14 years old. Give her a hand. Before I introduce Mark Meier, I have the pleasure of also introducing Bill Dehkes, who is the COO of the Face It Foundation. He's the one that drives that beautiful vehicle out there across the country and makes sure that Mark doesn't get lost. He also cooks for him and takes care of a lot of things. But I'm going to let Bill come up and give you some information about the Face It Foundation. They've got some wonderful web resources for you and a lot of information to share. And then Bill will introduce Mark. So Bill, come on up.
Thank you all very much. It is a pleasure to be here with you guys. My name is Bill Dehkes. I am the Chief Operating Officer of the Face It Foundation. We're a Minneapolis-based nonprofit. Started about 2.5 years ago. Our line that we use is working with men to overcome depression. Anyone that suffers from depression or knows anyone that suffers from depression takes a lot of work. That's what we emphasize. Our mission statement with the Face It Foundation is through education, online tools, and peer-to-peer support, we work with men to lead a happy and healthy, productive life. That sounds simple. You need to make your mission statement direct and precise, but there's a lot that goes into that. Education is important. A lot of men that suffer out there don't know what depression is. They don't understand what they're feeling. Online tools. When we get back, we're going to launch an online depression management tool basically so people can go online in the privacy of their home or their office and actually get valuable resources that will help them take the next step to getting better. Peer-to-peer support, in my opinion, the most important thing out there is peer-to-peer support. To be able to relate to someone one-on-one who is going through what you've gone through is invaluable. To me, it's more important than a pill. It's more important than a therapist. We run into people all across this country that tell us their stories. And it's amazing because Mark can relate to a lot of these people and a lot of what they went through. Unless you've been through those things, it's hard. You can be compassionate, you can be caring, but to actually understand exactly what that person's going through is really difficult. I had a chance to take a walking tour today of your city, which was nice and exhausting on this warm day. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. But as we chatted, as we walked, we shared stories that we each have been through. And I tell people that at an early age, at age 14, I lost my mother to a brain aneurysm. This person I was walking with lost her father at the same age. Unless you've been through that loss, it's really hard to relate to what goes through a mind of a 14-year-old who now doesn't have a mother. I went through the thoughts of why me, the anger, the sadness, the God must be punishing me for some reason. You need the peer-to-peer support. We all need to reach out to our friends and family. It's no surprise here that I see the majority of women. That usually happens. That happens in our Face It Foundation. About 80 to 85% of the calls and emails we get are from women. Their husbands are struggling, their fathers, their sons. Men don't reach out. So the women do it for us. Women are different than men. We don't like to share and talk, although Mark and I do. Women love to share and talk. We're different. But trust me, as someone who's been through this, we want to share. We do want to talk. We just don't know how to do it. There's a certain shame and stigma associated with that just stops us from doing it. But once we do, get ready, because we love to share. So women, hang in there with your men. Trust me, it'll be worth it. 27 years ago, I met a woman named Wendy Peterson. This June 11th, I celebrated my 23rd wedding anniversary. 27 years ago, when I met this wonderful woman who is going to be with my soulmate forever, I got introduced to her family. Oh my. We've all heard you can pick your friends but not your relatives. She introduced me to one of her cousins, Mark Meier. Boy, did we hit it off. A lot the same, about the same age, loves sports, all that kind of stuff. What a guy. Little did I find out that some 25 years later, we would be together doing the Face It Foundation. In the beginning of May, we started off with a bike ride. Mark wanted to raise awareness. When Mark came to me about the foundation, he said, I want to do this foundation. I want to help people with depression, and I think you'd be perfect to help me with it. I said, you know what, that'd be great. I'm in. It was a great time for me. It was perfect. Then he said, by the way, in the summer of 2011, I want to do a bike ride to raise awareness. I want to do events all across the country, from San Francisco to New York. And I said, man, you're my hero, Mark. Good luck with that. And since I am here speaking to you, there was more to his plan, obviously, than I assumed. But the bike ride goes from San Francisco to New York. It's not a straight line like you would think. It's up and down. We've been through San Francisco. We were at Stanford and Palo Alto. We were in Denver. We were all across South Dakota. And I have to tell you, and Mark will agree, that this is like home to us. People like you. The people in Iowa are by far the friendliest people we've run into. And this is home. The green grass, the friendly people, the beautiful farmers market, which I was able to experience a country shipwreck this morning, which was just wonderful for me. It reminded me of home. So we're doing this bike ride to raise awareness. We're doing events like this all across the country, and we get big crowds. We get big crowds because of what we're doing, because of the topic, and because of the person you're going to hear from in just a minute. Mark's got an incredible story. Picked up a brochure back there from the Out of the Darkness. It says in the United States, a person dies by suicide every 15 minutes, claiming more than 34,000 lives. The next line is, in ours, is 27,000 of those are men. Men are way more successful. 9 years ago, God stopped a suicide attempt. Mark was ready to end his life. From the outside, as a relative, he looked like he had everything. Everything. Wife, kids, house, big job, you name it. But depression is real. It really is. What Mark's been doing ever since is he's been teaching at the University of Minnesota in the mood disorders. He has his master's degree in social work. He frequently gives up his time to help the homeless, men's groups, and other associations all over Minneapolis. The real reason you guys are here is to hear this story, not mine. Everyone, please, Mark Meier.
Bill's too kind, so it's really nice to be here, and I have to do the thank yous too, because we wouldn't have had the day or the turnout today if it weren't for a few people. So I want to thank Scott Lindsley, who I met a couple years ago doing some work, for hearing me out when I said, hey Scott, I want to do a bike ride. Why doesn't Mercy have a nice big event for us? So thanks to Scott and this wonderful institution for putting this on. And again, a big thanks to Dan from the Hawkeye Bike Club, or Bike Association. It was really nice to be able to be in the back, ride on a highway, and not worry about being the first one to get hit by a semi, which has been the last 2,000 miles for us. So, not that ever actually went through my mind, but anyway, it was really a fun opportunity to spend time together riding with the bike group. So thank you for that, and thank you for all of you for coming out. That's what this is about. That's why we're doing this bike ride. That's why we're doing events, is so we can get out and talk to communities about depression. And as Bill told you, our organization focuses its efforts on depression in men because that's just what our niche is. But depression obviously impacts lots and lots of women. And Ann cited some statistics to you, but I think there are certain realities about the disparities that exist between depression in men and women. And we can start with the most obvious, that men generally won't even stop to ask for directions, let alone admit they're depressed. So we have some real work to do. We have to help men to understand what depression is. We have to help men to understand that coming out and admitting that you're suffering from depression doesn't mean you're weak, and it doesn't mean that somehow you failed. What it means is that you have something that is very real and impacts lots of people, or lots of men, in a very significant and serious way. Like Bill told you, this idea for starting an organization focused on depression came into my head a few years ago. I have had a master's degree in social work for 17 years, and I've worked in the mental health field for quite a number of those years. And I lived with depression myself for a number of years, and wanting to try to do something to give back, to help other people, is sort of at the core of who I am and who a lot of us are. I think there's some good Midwest values that are part of who we are as people, to want to help out other people. But my journey to getting to this podium it's a long one. It's been a long one, but this is about hope, and this is about recovery. And one of the questions that I frequently get asked when people ask me about depression is, can you ever get over it? Or are you always going to be depressed? Are you always going to be mentally ill? Are you always going to have this thing hanging over your head? And I tell people, you know what? You can get over it. You can get over being depressed. You absolutely can get over it, and you can move forward. It takes work, and I meet people all the time who struggle and want to feel better, and they're taking the time and putting in the effort to get better, and sometimes it just takes time. And I'm a product of one of those people that took a long time for things to get better for me. I was diagnosed with depression when I was in college, and I'm 44 years old. And one other person I have to thank who's nowhere in this room right now is my wife, Amy, of 21 years. I wouldn't be on the road doing this bicycle ride if it weren't for her. And I quite frankly probably wouldn't be standing in front of you for many, many reasons if it weren't for my wife, Amy. And you know, in getting out and talking about this story, one of the things we really emphasize and talk about is family and the importance of family. But I was diagnosed with depression when I was in college. So I'm 44 years old. So that was back in about 1988. I like so many people who go off to college or who are at that age in their lives, I was starting to struggle. And I probably had struggled. We were talking a little bit earlier, Scott and I and another gentleman, about you know, how do you get depressed? Where does this all come from? And when I think back to some of the struggles I had as a child and as a kid, I grew up in this great house. My father was an electrician. My mom was a housewife. We played sports. We hunted. We fished. You know, we did all those things that you do. But we also had some challenges in our house. And my older brother, who is bipolar, doing very well now, but he had a lot of struggles, and there was a lot of chaos in my house. But the point I want to make is one of the things that I know significantly impacted me growing up was being the victim of a very well-orchestrated bullying event. And we were just talking about some terrible tragedy you had in Mount Vernon, some questions, some teens who lost their lives. And, you know, one of the things that in our communities we often don't talk about is sort of the environment that kids grow up in, and how critically important it is that they feel safe and that they have, here's a word that often makes men uncomfortable, that kids have good self-esteem, that they feel good about themselves. I've encountered and met a lot of men in my life who live and struggle with depression, and I think at one of the core roots of that depression is they don't like themselves. They don't feel good about themselves. And this bullying experience that I felt and that I went through for about 3-4 months, in which I was never ever actually physically fighting, but I was tormented. I was humiliated. I was embarrassed. These kids went out of their way to do anything and everything that they could to make me not feel like much of a person. And when you're in 8th grade and you start to believe that you're worthless and that you're no good, that pattern can follow you through life. And that pattern can lead you to make a lot of poor choices. It can lead you to do a lot of things that in hindsight, when you feel good about yourself, you probably never would have done. So I was diagnosed in college. I was having the classic sort of signs and symptoms of depression. And I'll give you a 2-minute overview of depression, because it's depression is very complex. That's where we have to start with this disease. We do not fully understand it yet, and we do not fully understand by any means what causes it, what cures it, what makes it get worse. It's a very, very complicated process because it involves our brain, and it involves our emotions, and it involves our behaviors. And so depression, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's usually diagnosed by talking to one another. We can't blood test you yet. We can't x-ray you. We can't put you in an MRI. Some days you look really depressed. Some days you don't look so depressed. And so it can be, for those of you who have lived with it, you know this roller coaster. You know how some days it's okay and some days it's not so okay. And that's really hard for people to understand when they look at you, because they want to know, why can't you just get over it? You were so happy yesterday. What's wrong with you? Why can't you just think the way you did yesterday? Why can't you just be satisfied like you were last week? But that's what depression does to people, is it robs them of their ability to cope, to feel good about themselves and feel good about their world. And one of the things, you know, people often say, well, everybody gets depressed. Well, everybody has bad days. Everybody has moments when they just don't feel themselves. The difference between that and depression is that usually you can work yourself through a bad day. Depression lasts. It's far more severe, it's far more intense, and it certainly lasts a lot longer. Depression is characterized by 9 different criteria that we look at when we're talking to people. And the hallmark of depression is, there's 2 things we ask, is, have you lost interest in activities that you enjoy, and do you often feel sad and down and hopeless? Well, guess what? Women are very willing to endorse and talk about those things. Men won't. And that's where we probably misdiagnose depression in men all the time, is we ask men to say, do you feel sad? Sad's not an emotion a lot of men even identify with. Men tend to be more angry, more irritable, more agitated, and so it looks different. Depression looks different in men and women. We also ask you questions about your appetite, about your sleeping patterns, about how do you feel about yourself. Do you have feelings of worthlessness or guilt? Do you have difficulty concentrating? And we were just talking, one of the folks that I was biking with today, we were talking about some emerging data coming out showing the impact of untreated and severe depression on memory. Depression absolutely impacts our ability to recall information. So it impacts your ability to sleep. And then, of course, in its worst case scenario, it often causes people to take actions such as trying to commit suicide or have thoughts about suicide. So depression is very complex, and it remains something that we have a long way to go in terms of understanding. But I think what's so exciting for me as both a researcher and a teacher and a clinician is we're having conversations like this. We're having almost 100 people turn out to talk about depression in a public and community way, and that's very, very important. So I was diagnosed with this complex issue back when I was in college, and I was sort of classic. I mean, you could have looked at me, and anybody with any skills of observation would have said, wow, this guy is a train wreck. I cried all the time. I stopped going to classes. I would call my now wife, then girlfriend, telling her how terrible I was and what a waste my life was, and why did I bother continuing on? And she would tell me, Mark, you have so much going for you. You have people who love you. You have people who care about you. None of that mattered. That's the difference between a bad day and depression. I could hear that stuff, but it didn't make me feel any better. So I was diagnosed with this disease when I was in college. And I'll never forget, I went to see, a friend of mine took me to the health center at the University of Minnesota and said, Mark, we got to get you some help. This is ridiculous. You're not yourself. You're really struggling. And one of the things that scared me is this is when I first had my first bouts and thoughts about suicide. I would find myself, the University of Minnesota has two campuses, the East Bank and the West Bank, that are connected by a bridge. And I would find myself walking back and forth between classes thinking, if I jumped off this bridge, all these problems would go away. But thankfully for me at that point, I still had enough in my head to live for. I still had reason that I thought, I need to keep going. So my friend takes me to this counseling center, and I'll never forget, I sat down and I talked to this psychologist, wonderful man, asked me all sorts of questions, and he came and he said, well, Mark, clearly you're depressed. And what he doesn't recognize is that when he said that word depressed to me, that set off every red flag and bell in my head saying, oh no, I'm not depressed. There's got to be something else wrong with me. And like so many men, I just could not face even hearing or listening to that word. And by the time this poor psychologist had the opportunity to suggest some options for treatment for me, I was probably up running down the hallway because there was no way I was going to deal with this issue. If I could get in a time machine and go back, I think there's a whole bunch of people in my life, including myself, who would probably want to go back and listen to that psychologist and consider help. Because what I did is what so many people do. I thought, I just got to try harder. I just have to get over this. And that's when things start going through your head like, this is ridiculous. What's wrong with you? Why are you so weak? Why can't you just get over this? Look at what you have going for you. There's something good going on up there, isn't there? I saw all the heads go up that way. All of these wonderful things that I had in my life didn't matter to me. And they didn't make me feel any better, and they didn't make me feel any future or any hope. And so, like a lot of people, and if you're here because of somebody you care about, let me tell you that they probably know they're struggling, but it's really hard to ask for help. And it's really hard to accept help. And what we need is for you to support us, and we need you to encourage us. And if my wife were here today, sometimes she gets up and talks, she would tell you that in hindsight, she sure wishes she had pushed me a little bit harder to get some help. And I can tell you that in hindsight, I wish she had too. I don't know what I would have done with it, but I think that it might have been the catalyst to get me to seek help sooner. So I made it through this depressive episode, which lasted for, it's hard to recall, probably 8 months to a year, pretty intense, pretty severe. And it slowly but surely went away, which is what depression does for some people. About 50% of people who have a significant major depressive episode like that never experience it again. We don't know why. The problem is I was in the other pot that has it as a chronic disease. And that's what happens for a lot of people, is that their depression then maybe goes away, but I think what it's doing is retooling to come back in a much more severe and significant way. I made it through college, and I learned how to function in the world. I wasn't living, I wasn't happy, I wasn't satisfied, but I was making it through day to day. I was like, if you want to use the analogy, I was a functioning depressed person, like a functioning, you hear people say, well, he's a functioning alcoholic, which I quite frankly don't know what that means, but I was going through the motions of life and not enjoying myself. And what happens to people over that period of time is that I started to reinforce all those strong messages in my head about worthlessness. The future's never going to get any better. I'm always going to struggle. I'm always going to muddle through life. And after a while, it wears you down. And you get tired, and you start to run out of the desire to fight. I made it through college. I went to graduate school, and like a lot of people with depression, I was just thinking if I could find the perfect place, the perfect job, all these perfect things, that I would suddenly be a happy person. And I was doing what a lot of us do. I was looking outside of myself. I was trying to find someone else to make me feel good, rather than being able to do that for myself. My wife and I, after I finished graduate school, my wife and I moved to Portland. Because if I just move to Portland, everything will be fine. We moved out to Portland, and lo and behold, things weren't just perfect. And my depression started to get worse and worse. Now, the best thing that happened to me out in Portland is that my daughter Anna, who's on this bicycle ride with me, was born. And that little life, that little person in my life, was enough to lift me up for a short period of time. But then what I suddenly started to realize is that this child, this beautiful, beautiful child, was a burden to me. And I thought, what is going on? Why is this life? Why is this thing that I should love, that I should care so deeply about, why is it something that just seems to bother me? What is wrong with me? Well, rather than getting help, I told my wife it's time to move back to Minneapolis. Because you know what? If you avoid your emotions and your feelings and you don't deal with them, you just have to find other ways to cope. Well, we moved back to Minneapolis, and as Bill said, my wife and I worked very, very hard to make sure everybody saw that we had the perfect life, that we had the perfect house, the perfect cars, the perfect kids, that I had the perfect job, that everything was perfect. Because as my wife would tell you, all she wanted back then was for things to be normal. And she wanted all the things that went on behind closed doors, the fact that we fought a lot, that I was not a very attentive father, that I was not much of a husband, that I was very abusive of alcohol. All of those things, she wanted that to go away. But rather than dealing with it, we hid it. And it got worse. So we moved back to Minneapolis. And this is about 1998 or so, 1999 that we moved back. I took a job, was running a dialysis clinic at our big county hospital in Minneapolis. I knew at that point, I remember I have a master's degree in social work, but I was aware enough to know that I probably wasn't of much value to people at that point in my life in terms of helping them with their own mental health issues, because I was struggling. And what happened is that the stress of that job, the stress of my life, I now have 2 more kids in my life. I have my son Ben, who's 12, and my daughter Ellie, who is 10, were born. And so we were back in Minneapolis, and we have 3 young children. And my depression has now gotten to the point where it's basically unmanageable. I can't hardly get out of bed. When I do get out of bed, it's a struggle to go to work. It's a struggle to do anything. And my wife is practically begging me to go and get help. So I finally did acquiesce after I walked off of my job as the administrator of the dialysis clinic, where I literally one day packed up my bag and said I'm done and walked away. I did go see a psychiatrist. I walked in and talked to that doctor, and my wife was sitting in the waiting room, very hopeful that this will be the time that her husband finally agrees to get some help. I went in, all my shame, all my embarrassment, all my humiliation of the things I've done, welling up inside of me, and I sit down with that psychiatrist, and he says, well, Mark, clearly you're depressed. We need to put you on medication. Well, I flashed back in my head to when I was diagnosed back in college, and I told that doctor, thanks, but no thanks. I took his prescriptions, walked out. My wife said, how'd it go? I said, I've got some pills. She said, that's great. She took me to Target, and I threw my prescriptions in the garbage. Now, we don't make the best decisions when we're struggling with depression. I recognize that. And every time I tell the story, I get people looking at me going, what, are you crazy? And the answer, of course, is yes, I was. So, as I look back on that, why I talk about this is to help you understand that when you're depressed, you're not functioning in a capacity that really allows for you to be making the best decisions. And when you've got somebody in your life who is depressed and you wonder why they won't just listen to you, I'm not alone. I know lots of people who have made choices and decisions like I've made up until that point in my life. And it's because of the impact of the illness, and it's because of the way, the intensity with which you feel this self-disgust that just wells and lives within inside of you. This sort of, this very strong sense of, I don't deserve anything good, I don't deserve to be alive, I don't deserve anything. And it's very hard for people to understand, particularly when they see all the wonderful things you have around you and all of the things that are available to you, and you won't reach out and get that help. So my wife, we go home. I don't tell her. I lied to her about the medications. My wife is a nurse. She's a smart woman. After a couple of days, she sees there's no pill bottles in our house. Mark, where's your prescription? You know what, Amy? I'm fine. I just needed to get out of that job. I'll be fine. I'll try harder. I'll work harder. I'll get over this. I promise you. At this point, my wife, remembers raising 3 very young children. And her husband is probably a complete burden to her. And thank God, who I believe in very strongly, my wife said, you know what, I'm not going to leave this guy, but I'm really struggling with him. My wife focused a lot of her energy on raising our kids at that point. Not because she didn't love me, but basically because I think she didn't know what else to do with me. So time progressed after that visit with the doctor. About 6 or 7 months, I found a job. I was back at work. But at this point, my depression now is completely out of control. All of those things that had kept me alive for so many years, the love of my wife, the love of my kids, the desire to want to try to get better, were now eroding and now fading. I had run out of steam. I could not live this way any longer. And the irony, of course, is I still hadn't even tried to get any help. I hadn't reached out to anyone. I hadn't reached out to my friends. I had gone to the doctor, but I didn't have any intention of listening to what those doctors had to offer me. And so now in my head, it's time to end it. And suicide, and thanks to Maureen for being here from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, suicide is this unbelievably horrible tragedy that leaves countless millions of people wondering what happened. They see the person who died, and they see all the things that they had going for them and all the wonderful things in their lives, and we oftentimes are left wondering why. What was it? And what I can tell you from the perspective of somebody who made a pretty serious plan to take his own life, I wasn't going to tell anybody that I was done. I wasn't going to tell my wife. I certainly wasn't going to tell my friends. I wasn't going to tell my family. But I had run out of gas. I could not go anymore. My wife, as I mentioned to you earlier, my wife is a nurse. And so on this particular night that I had made the decision to end my life, as I've done many times, she went off to work. She had switched about her work schedule so she could try to be away from our house as little as possible, because it was pretty difficult to leave her husband in the care of their 3 children. And so on this particular night, she went to work, and as I did most nights, I drank excessively, because for me it was easier to be intoxicated than it was to face my feelings, face my emotions. I put my kids to bed very young. Anna was just about 5, Ben was a little over 2, and Ellie was 9 months old. And I didn't write a note. I didn't give away my possessions. I didn't give any warning signs of what I was going to do. I'm from Minnesota. You're from Iowa. We all have guns. We hunt. We do those things. I put my kids to bed, I was intoxicated, and I loaded up my 12-gauge shotgun with every intention of ending my life. I sat with a loaded gun up in my bedroom, and through fate, luck, God, whatever it is you choose to believe in, my 9-month-old daughter, Ellie, woke up crying. That was enough to get that gun out of my mouth, get it set down on my bed, and for me to go down and hold my daughter. Thankfully, my wife came home from work, and I was admitted to the hospital the next day. Had that not happened, I probably am not standing here today. I probably leave behind a wife and 3 kids who would struggle. My kids would struggle probably with drug abuse, alcohol addiction, early pregnancies, high school dropouts, all sorts of things that happen to people who are the survivors of a suicide. And so my message to men, my message to anybody, when you're suffering, when you're struggling with depression to that degree, is somewhere deep inside of you, find what you need to tell somebody how much you hurt. When you know somebody is struggling with depression, find it somewhere deep inside of you to have the empathy to understand that even though you may not see what they're going through or feel what they're going through or even be able to understand what they're going through, just know how hard and how much people struggle and support them and be there for them, because it's very powerful to help somebody. We, in the course of this bike ride, we have received emails, phone calls from people who have thanked us simply for standing up and talking about depression in public. Because there's still a great deal of shame, there's still a great deal of embarrassment that's associated with it. So my story goes on, and I went to the hospital. And I finally, because even when I was first in the hospital, I was still hell-bent on hurting myself for the first few days that I was there. But after a while, spending some time in the hospital, getting out of the hospital, getting some assistance, getting some help with some medication, going to some counseling, starting to look at my life again, over the course of the next 2 years, I started to feel better. It didn't happen overnight. I didn't just magically start to feel better. But over the course of 2 years, and I'll tell you what, people always say to me, is there one thing that helped you? Well, there's a lot of things, but if there was one thing that helped me, it's that I started to believe that I was worth it, and that I should feel good about myself, and that I was a good person. And for so many people who struggle with depression, we have this innate dislike of ourselves for whatever reason. And I don't know why, and I don't know for, what the reasons are for everybody. But for a guy like me, I just didn't like myself. And once I started to like myself, I realized, I'm not perfect, but I'm not a bad guy. And that sort of shift in my thinking has really helped me to be able to reach out and help other people. I don't feel embarrassed. I don't feel ashamed about talking what happened to me. And people will say, well, you're brave and it's courageous. I don't think so. I think telling people your story and sharing openly about what happens is how we help each other. And that's what really has motivated us to do this bike ride. So, you fast forward to today, and I'm 9.5, almost 10 years removed from the hospital. I still have bad days. I still feel sad. I still get upset. But I don't get depressed. I haven't had to battle that depression, and I'm thankful for that, for many, many reasons, obviously. And I've done many things to help myself. I've learned to manage stress. I told you I've learned to like myself. I've learned to be aware of when I'm struggling. If I don't sleep well for a couple of nights in a row, boy, I sure start to think about what's going on. Why aren't I sleeping? What is this anxiety? What is this stress about? I'm far more involved in my kids' lives than I've ever been before. I'm back to doing things I love to do. I'm back to coaching hockey. I'm back to coaching soccer, softball, things that I had gotten so far away from that give me all sorts of pleasure. I do those things. And of course, I get lucky and get to ride my bike across the United States. So this disease is complicated, and it's complex. And what you need to do if you're struggling is you need to tell somebody. You need to tell somebody. Because when you carry that around inside of you and you don't tell other people, you're giving yourself the message that what I have is something to be ashamed of. Because guess what? When people get cancer, when people have heart attacks, people come out of the woodwork to help them. And that's what we need for depression. We need people to step forward and say, I'm depressed, and we need people to start showing up with casseroles and whatever it is we do for people, right? We need people to reach out to us in that same manner. And you have to take care of yourself. And we were talking about this earlier as well. Taking care of yourself, if you're somebody who struggles with depression, you may feel very selfish, but we are often the kind of people who can't say no to anyone. We take on all sorts of stuff, and we don't take care of ourselves. And I've also learned that taking care of myself doesn't mean that I'm being selfish. It just means that I'm not much of a father, husband, community helper, or anything if I'm a miserable wreck. And you need to talk to somebody. You need to talk to your doctor. You need to talk to, I'm going to let Ann talk about Mercy's programs. You need to reach out to somebody who can help you be objective about what's going on. And Bill mentioned peer support. You know, reaching out to a friend is absolutely critical. And having somebody in your life that you can share these experiences with is critical. And what you need is you need that objective opinion, because when you're struggling with depression, I guarantee you your thinking is pretty skewed. I guarantee you you're not seeing the world the way it really is, because that's what depression does to you. So I'm very grateful. I'm very thankful. I'm a very lucky man to be standing here today. And I recognize that. And when Bill and I started Face It, you know, we made this commitment to do whatever we can to bring awareness to this issue, to do whatever we can to get people talking about it. And you know, I know we live in a world now where it seems like you can't turn around without, you know, finding a fundraiser or a cause. But I'm pretty firm in my commitment that we've got a long ways to go in raising awareness about depression. And that's why we do this, from San Francisco to New York City, and you got to give my daughter a little applause earlier, but you know, I just want to recognize from the podium this amazing 14-year-old, she's not even 15 yet, she'll be 15 next week, who is almost 1,000 miles on the back of a bicycle staring at her dad's butt. Now, I'm not sure how many ninth graders are willing to do such a thing. But if Anna were to come up here, and Anna has talked at some of our events, Anna would tell you how important it is to have a dad and have a mom that are involved in their kids' lives. And when I was struggling with depression, and if I were struggling today, I wouldn't be involved in my kids' lives. And that's another catalyst for you to admit to somebody that you're struggling, is you've got other people who need you. You got other people who need you well, and whether it's your kids, your spouse, your friends, your employer, whoever it is, people need you well. And it's a good thing to get help. So just in closing, I just want to thank all of you, and I certainly can take a few questions, or if you want to take some questions or comments or thoughts, and we'll stick around afterwards if you feel more comfortable chatting. We're happy to be here as well, but yes. Yep, and that's the question always on the table, is did medication turn out to be part of my recovery? And when I came out of the hospital, absolutely medication played a critical role in my recovery. And what medication does is medication treats symptoms. Medication helps you feel less sad. Medication helps you feel less anxious. Medication makes you want to not put guns in your mouth anymore. And then what I had to do from there is I had to fix my life. I had to fix how I felt about myself. I had to fix my relationships. I had to make some real decisions about what kind of life it was that I wanted to lead. And medication, if you look at the statistics and you look at the data and you look at what we're doing with medication in this country, there's reason to give pause. And I think what's important about medication is that when you go to your physician, when you go to somebody who will give you medication, what's important to ask is, what's the plan? What should I expect from these medications? What if they don't work? What are we going to do next? What is the next step in the treatment phase? And in addition to these medications, besides the medication, what do I need to do? We have a terrible habit in this country of giving out medication and not telling people all the other things they need to do to get over their depression. And we have a terrible habit in this country right now of adding all sorts of medications together that there's not a lot of good science to support their use. So my advice to people is that if you take an antidepressant, know why. Know what to expect from it, and understand what it can and cannot do for you. I tell people all the time, it's not going to make your life better. I mean, it's not going to make everything better. It can help you without question. And I used an antidepressant for a number of years and made a decision about a year and a half back to go off from it, and have done just fine. Would I go back on it? If I got back to where I was, if I want to stay married, I would go back on them. But no, I'm teasing. I would not hesitate to go back on them. I think one of the my opinion and thoughts on medication is they've been oversold as sort of this end-all, be-all, fix-all. And that's my only caveat, my only statement from the podium is just be aware of why and what the plan is and what to expect from the medication. Yes? Are you talking about going through a bunch of different types? Many. So the question is, why would you have to take... Well, and it depends, and the reality is that the science behind antidepressants is not nearly as neat and clean as the people who sell them would like you to believe. And there are certain people who simply do not respond to antidepressants, and why that is, we don't know. And some people respond very well in short terms. Some people do, longer term. And so, that's, and I'm not a physician, and so I want to be careful with what I say. But what we do know is that how and where they work in the brain still remains a bit of a mystery to us. And so it's important, like I said, when you are working with a physician or whoever is prescribing, what should I expect? What should I feel in 6 weeks? What should I feel in a month, in 2 months? And stops working. Well, my response to that would be that no, avoid alcohol at all costs when you're depressed. I know. The medication, I'm not here to give you a neuroscience lecture. The medications stimulate certain chemicals in the brain. Those chemicals are associated with uplifting mood. The problem with an uplifting mood is that doesn't necessarily take care of an underlying depression. Right, without question. Yep, yes. Well, and you can't answer that question, is he depressed, just on that. But what I would say to you is that, she's very concerned about her husband, his lack of energy, his lack of interest, and sort of his not interacting, inability, just wanting to be by himself. I think what's important is if you could get your husband to talk to somebody and you go with him, because otherwise your husband will do what I did. He'll go in there and he'll tell that doctor everything is just fine. And he'll tell that doctor everything that he thinks that doctor wants to hear. And that's classic men. And when it comes to health-seeking behaviors, men's willingness to go see a doctor, we're terrible at that anyway. If it's not bleeding or broken, and even then we often won't go. But to go and for somebody to say, for your husband to go and say to this physician, and Bill talked about this earlier, to whoever it is your husband would go see, for him to be able to say, well, I'm sad and I'm lonely and I'm depressed, that probably is not necessarily in the way he might be thinking about his world. So what I would do is I'd encourage you, if at all possible, to go with him and tell whoever he sees, and I would encourage you to keep encouraging him to go and seek some help. Yes. Yes. Cry. It's very tough. Her comment was the roller coaster, the having to put on the face for people. And I think in large, part of that is still, it's difficult to tell people, whether it's cancer, whether it's whatever the illness is, sometimes it's difficult to tell your colleagues, your coworkers what you're struggling with. And I think, my suggestion to you is to be as proactive and active in your treatment and counseling and doing the things that, can help you move forward, and not feeling shame. Sometimes you have to go out to your car and cry. That's okay. And I think that sometimes, to me, that's a profoundly strong coping skill, because you're then going back. And to me, and I don't know that you're pretending as much as sometimes you just have to make it through a day. And I think we're not very good. We have these expectations of ourselves when we struggle through depression. Well, I'm so horribly depressed, so I should be just perfect at work. I'll tell you what, you go to work. And, well, I would suggest to you that that's a strong coping skill, and sometimes you gotta cry. And I think that, my thought to you is just to recognize that you're still doing the things you need to do, and you're moving forward. And I understand that feeling of going and having to feel like you're hiding something. That's very difficult. But at the same time, I think if you recognize how much you maybe struggle and still go and do your job, it's pretty impressive. I don't have an ace in the hole. I wish I did. I wish I did. I'll tell you what I have is I have a well-balanced life. I have friends, I have family, and I have a willingness to now use those people when I'm miserable and unhappy. I don't have an ace. I wish I could give you that one. Can we take one more question? One more, and then we'll... yeah, they'll stick around. Yep, yes. Is there information about our foundation on the table? Yep, we have some cards that we can give you. Absolutely. So, thank you so much. I'm going to give it back to Ann.
There are resources available. It's usually just taking that first step and saying to somebody, I need help. Back on the table, we do have some brochures on resources of the various services that Mercy Medical Center offers. We have a wide array of services. We have from young children that we see all the way across the lifespan for a variety of different, whether it's depression, anxiety, family issues, grief. There are so many things that come in the way of us living our lives the way we want to. And if you feel or you know somebody that's stuck or needs to talk, it's usually just a matter of making that first phone call. So please get some of the information before you have a chance to leave. We also, on our website, www.mercycare.org, there are a variety of resources on that, too, that can help you. Thank you again so much for coming. The turnout was wonderful. We're all going to be around for a little while afterwards to be able to answer some questions as well. And all want to wish Bill and Mark and Anna the safe and exciting travels. They're hoping to get to New York City by middle of August. So they have 50 more miles to ride today. So for those of us that are going home and taking a good nap, I'm very impressed. So again, thank you so much for coming.